I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he's world-renowned for his work as a scientist, writer, and mindfulness teacher. And he started the Mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic in 1979, and his MBSR program has helped countless individuals to transform their suffering and find peace and happiness. We've had the privilege of practicing together as a community this weekend at Dartmouth, and it's just wonderful to have somebody who has contributed so much be so humble and gracious and practice alongside all of us. So I really could tell how much he cares about humanity and those around him. So I really want to express a lot of gratitude for him to be here tonight, and also to be so calm as we worked through the technological problems. It was wonderful, so thank you.
I can think of at least 4 people in this room who probably would do a much better job tonight than me about talking about the science of mindfulness, because I retired from the science of mindfulness 25 years ago, and do not keep up with the literature in any kind of way. I do read, things, but I don't. So I give talks about it, and I don't do PowerPoint or anything. So I tried to craft something today that would be a melange, so to speak, of some spontaneous talking and some and history about how the science has reached this particular point. And I already honor your patience that we're a half an hour, getting started. So I'll try to be brief at least. And just say that the Buddha, the scientist, has to be coupled, in my view, with the way he was more traditionally spoken of as Buddha the physician, physician to the world. And I don't like to make artificial distinctions between science and medicine, for instance, because they are deeply, deeply linked. I mean, and that's what is not being understood in Washington, is people are being fired right or left for no reason, and grants being canceled. I mean, this is a kind of manifestation of ignorance at a level that is absolutely colossal. Greed, hatred, and ignorance, actually, when you come right down to it. And so how governance interfaces with Dharma, which really means lawfulness, and how we govern ourselves, is intimately related, maybe reciprocally or inversely, let's say, to what's going on in Washington right now. And so this is a moment where we really all need to maintain our sanity and equanimity and compassion and clarity in the face of a certain kind of assault on some first approximation, which is what science and medicine are all about, to the actuality of things. And it's always tentative, and that's what people often don't understand, is that it's not all that precise all the time, that you have to work your way to a deeper kind of understanding, and that's a practice. And so, the words medicine and meditation sound a lot alike in English, and it's not by accident. They're etymologically linked at the hip. And I learned this from a physicist, David Bohm, who wrote an incredible book in 1980 called Wholeness in the Implicate Order. And in there, at some point, he points out that medicine, medicine, the Latin means to cure, but the deep Indo-European root before the Latin means to measure. So what does measurement have to do with either medicine or meditation? And here's this physicist who is a colleague of Einstein's and kicked out of the country for political reasons and had to emigrate to Brazil in the 50s. Medicine is the the restoring of right inward measure when it is disturbed, okay? With drugs, with surgery, with therapies of one kind or another. That's medicine. The deep Indo-European root means to measure. So medicine is the restoring of right inward measure. And what's meditation? It's the direct realization of right inward measure, okay? That you're already whole, that there's nothing missing. Even in the face of greed, hatred, and delusion, and dukkha, that your essential nature is Buddha nature, is whole. And that when you align yourself with that or realize it in a certain way, make it come alive in your life, or invite it to come alive in your life, then whatever medicine or science can do to help with chronic medical conditions or health conditions and so forth is complemented by your deep resourcing of interior resources that are part and parcel of being human and being alive. And if you stop for a moment and just think about under the vault of your cranium, every single one of everybody here have a cranium? So right under the vault of this cranium here is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known bios universe. Right under your little old head, whether you're feeling anxious or depressed or a little no good or whatever it is, like the level of complexity is staggering. And I can wag my tongue and move the air, and it gets to your ears and vibrates the tympanic membrane, and it goes to the auditory cortex, and you can actually decode this sentence, and I can keep creating it without any sense of how it's going to go or end, and it's totally grammatical. So there's a lot that we take for granted. And one of the beauties of mindfulness practice is that it allows us to actually drop into the actuality of things and recruit or mobilize all of our interior resources for learning, growing, and healing across the lifespan. And that's what MBSR is really about, is an invitation to catch people falling through the cracks of the healthcare system and challenging them to do something for themselves that nobody on the planet, including their physicians and surgeons, can do for them, not as an alternative to medicine and surgery, or science, but as a complement to it. Okay, so it's a participatory medicine. And over the past, 45 years, inroads have been made. A lot of progress has been made, but people actually have come to recognize that what looks a lot from the outside like nothing turns out to have profound implications on the brain, on the nervous system, on the cardiovascular system, on virtually every conceivable system in the body, including the interstitium, which is which is an organ system, we can talk about it as an organ system, that was not recognized until very recently as even having any, identity, that was completely missed. And that, completely changes our relationship or understanding of how Rolfing works, or, massage or acupuncture, or all of these kinds of things. So one moment, science can sort of make certain areas taboo, and the next moment, there's a whole other way that this might actually be really valid and validated. So it's very important to actually be aware of our prejudices or our fixed views of what's legitimate and what's not legitimate, because we've seen revolution after revolution after revolution in science where everybody thought the person was an idiot, and then they win the Nobel Prize 35 years later. And there are many cases of this. You can research them. So I thought what I'd do today, because I am the world's most incompetent person to give this talk, and I don't know how I wound up with the assignment, because as I said, there are so many people in this room that could give a much better talk about what's going on in research in mindfulness now, that I had do my best to just give you a kind of background or a larger sweep using slides that I've used in the past which I never show PowerPoint slides when I talk anymore. But I thought, well, what the hell? I'll just see how it goes. And the first half hour was terrific, before I even started. So if I blow it for the next period of time, don't worry about it. So here's a study, here's a chart that you're all familiar with, and it only goes through 2022 because I couldn't find 2023. And I hesitated to ask David Black. We developed this slide together years ago, and he lives in Altadena with his family, and his house didn't burn down, but everything else did burn down, including a kid's school and church and everything. So I haven't asked him to update this slide. But you all know this slide, probably, or one version or another of this slide. And you can see that around 2000, 2002, and 2003, it starts to go exponential. And this is the number of papers per year in the medical and scientific literature that has the word mindfulness in the title. So in 1979, which is right off here, the idea that you could bring Buddhist meditation practice, and I like to say, I hope it doesn't provoke anybody too much, without the Buddhism, which I sometimes say is the real Buddhism, because the Buddha himself wasn't a Buddhist, and then we can get into even more arguments. But be that as it may, this is a kind of, exponential growth. And exponential growth cannot go on forever. And so at some point it's going to level off. And I think in 2023, it did seem like it was, and I don't know what it will be for 2024. But this is like, the generation of an entire field bringing meditation into medicine in a way that kind of has been recognized as authentic, valid, and worth doing. And those of you in the room who are doing this kind of work nowadays, this kind of research, both on the clinical side and on the basic science side and the neuroscience side, just the deepest of bows to you, because it's like really, really incredibly important. Whatever happens with the funding in the short term. Now, I thought I'd show you a kind of adaptation of the Kalachakra mandala that I did many, many years ago to describe what really goes on in MBSR. And you'll notice that at the center of it is the room. The whole deal with getting, with MBSR or any mindfulness-based program is to get people into a room. I mean, it's really true. I mean, if you got to get the patients to come to the hospital and come to a class. And the class takes place in a room. And we have the room as a circle so that people are sitting around the edges of a square so that people can see each other. And we practice together. So we're not practicing in theater style. We're practicing in the round. So everybody sees everybody else and hears everybody else's narrative, usually around dukkha and what brings you into the room. And in order to have that room, you need all sorts of staff and office space in hospitals, all of which is expensive and difficult to argue, especially if people think meditators are, it's insane, that you need teachers, you need a clinic, you need doctors and providers, and you need people to come into the room, to be referred into the room, and then you need a hospital in which that happens, and then that hospital is associated with a medical center, and then you have medicine and research, and then healthcare and insurance to pay for it, and then employers and corporations who send people to these kinds of things, and then society and what's going on in society. And then after that, it's like the world, and after that's the universe. So that locates it, It's just a kind of modest interpretation of one way of looking at the challenge of getting people to befriend themselves. Okay? Because the real room isn't the room that they come into in the hospital. The real room is here. Okay, the real room is the human heart. And all of this has scientific implications because it can all be studied in a remarkable number of different ways, including what's under the vault of the cranium. Okay? Because it turns out that a lot of stuff changes when people spend 8 weeks in this room, and if somebody observed them in the room, they would probably all be in agreement that they were doing nothing. You just sit there. Or they just lie there on the floor of the hospital. Or they do funny things like this, just like nothing or nonsense. And then or very slow walking. And yet we see profound changes in things like, functional connectivity between different regions of the brain, and reductions in size of different regions of the brain, including the amygdala, and connections between frontal cortex and prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and the whole default mode network. You take people and put them in a scanner. Okay, how many of you work with fMRIs and scanners? Nobody, 1 or 2 people. So take somebody, you put them in a scanner, and you tell them, don't do anything, just lie there. And then this whole midline region of the brain just goes insane. I mean, it's just like tons of activity. We just said, lie there, don't do anything. And what is this so-called default mode network? Well, how many of you have ever been in an fMRI scanner? It's like very stressful. There's a lot of banging, magnets banging and stuff like that. And there's no movies usually, so you're just stuck in a tube. So what do you default to? What you have to buy at the store on your way home, or what's going on with the kids or whatever. So what we're defaulting to is really, to cut to the chase, the story of me. We're defaulting to a narrative centered around, and this is a favorite topic of mine, and if the Musk and Trump come in and yank me out at this particular moment, the pronouns, personal pronouns, I, me, and mine. That's what they're thinking in the default mode network. They're talking about like what I have to buy on my way home, or what's happening, how much stress I'm under, or blah blah blah. And that's what this whole default mode. Then you take people after 8 weeks of training in MBSR or other mindfulness kind of based interventions, and you put them in the scanner, and you see activity in other regions like the insula and the posterior cingulate cortex and various other regions, really complex. But attenuation in the default mode network. Why? Because you've liberated yourself, at least temporarily, from the personal pronouns, the story of me, starring me, and how horrible it is, or how wonderful it is, or how stressed it is, or how much pain I'm in. Or it's like I, me, mine, mine, mine. Okay? And what does the 8 weeks of MBSR do? It shows you that there's a way to be in wiser relationship, to govern yourself and the activity of your own mind and brain differently. So what it actually affords you is a kind of new dimension that is inhabitable. And that new dimension is called awareness. It's called awareness. And when journalists ask me, okay, John, it's on mindfulness, everybody's talking about mindfulness. Just give me what mindfulness is in one word. Because journalists like to be precise and, short of words. So I say, okay, well, there are two. One is awareness, or really pure awareness. So can we all agree that mindfulness means awareness? Does anybody want to argue with that one? Okay, so it's like, in a sense, it's ordinary. It's totally ordinary, because nobody needs to acquire awareness. We're born with it. So that you could say that's another default mode. But the problem with awareness is that, yeah, we're all born with awareness, the capacity for awareness, but what's missing? Access, reliable access when you need it. Maybe setting that to be your default mode rather than I, me, and minding in the story of me all over the place. Okay, that's what exercising the muscle of mindfulness does. Is it actually, and that's what the study shows, that 8 weeks of MBSR, and you see the attenuation in the medial frontal, default mode, and you see other areas lighting up. And this is just in its infancy. The neuroscience of mindfulness or the brain or anything like that, we know nothing. And that's why Musk says, well, it's all bullshit, just throw it out. They don't even think it's bullshit, they don't care. But this is how science works, is you start with little observations that you think you understand, and then 30 years later you realize you didn't understand it at all, but you had to start someplace. That's the beauty of science. It's like a love affair with the actuality of things. And I've come over my lifetime to actually, this may sound strange, but when I take my seat in the morning in the formal meditation practice as part of my unfolding practice of the day, I've come to see it as a radical act of sanity and love. And many of you have said that over the past couple of days, talking about the practice itself as a radical act of love. Just to be and fall awake, as opposed to fall into the story of I, me, and mine, which of course you do anyway, but once you're aware of it, then you can actually liberate the story. And then what's left is wakefulness. And you don't necessarily have to sit in a cave for 30 years and have water drip on your head, preferably in the Himalayas, before you realize this. It's realizable in this moment. In fact, as Thich would say, it's the only moment it's realizable in, right? I mean, there's no other moment. It's about this. And so one of the problems with meditation is that people have the thought that I'm supposed to be feeling something special. Do you know what I'm saying? Anybody? You run into that in your teaching, that like people want to feel the juice of the meditation practice. Whatever Thai has, I want that, or whoever you want to project, superpowers onto. And this is the big mistake. This is where dualistic practice really just is a problem. That mindfulness or any of these Dharma practices require a non-dual approach. No separation between subject and object. No me and my thoughts, but just awareness. And awareness is already non-dual, and you already have it. So all we need to do is cultivate access to awareness, and that's where practice comes in. But if you think, I'm supposed to be feeling something, and all I'm feeling is pain, or impatience, or frustration, well, welcome to the club. That's the curriculum for this moment, because that's what's here now. But then you can ask yourself really interesting questions, and for pain patients, this is people with chronic pain conditions, they're really liberating, is you can investigate, not just ask. It's not a cerebral or cognitive thing. In this particular moment is the awareness of what I'm calling pain, because it's really sensation, okay? Coupled with a lot of cognition and emotion. But whatever it is, in this moment, is my awareness of the pain in pain. And I don't like to use the word my associated with awareness because, we do, but it's not mine. You don't know where you got it. And you can't hold on to it. So is the awareness of your pain in pain? And people tell you no. And it's not a dissociation. It's not like I'm just walling something off. It's like you've walked into a hidden dimension. Physicists and cosmologists talk all the time about hidden dimensions. You probably know that we live in an 11-dimensional universe, but a lot of those dimensions didn't unfold completely after the Big Bang. But I say, well, if physicists and cosmologists can talk like that, maybe we can too. That awareness is a hidden dimension. Until you step into it, it's like just a thought, or just something you want to pursue. So you think, well, I'm not supposed to be feeling this. I need to be feeling something else. No, whatever you're feeling is the curriculum. This is it. And the awareness of it doesn't have to either push it away or pursue it. It can just recognize. Okay? And in that moment, you're free. In that moment, you're here. So in the journal Mindfulness, you've probably all seen this slide, but there was an article called the Bibliographic Analysis. I'd never heard of anything like this. Now the literature is full of them because as soon as one group does something, 20 groups imitate it. But it's like a computerized analysis of all the kind of interactions in the mindfulness universe, in science, in all the journals, not just the journal Mindfulness. And you can see it's like fun to look at. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on, and you're all in it, being, part of this whole enterprise. At least those of you who are studying it in one way or another, or practicing it in one way or another professionally. And then they look at keyword occurrences and things like that. But this is pretty cool because it's kind of looks a little bit like Indra's net. Indra's net is this classical Hindu and Buddhist model of the universe, which is the great god Indra has a net over his palace, where the properties of which are the net has multifaceted diamonds at every interstitch of the net, every joint in the net. And every diamond reflects every other diamond in the web. So it's a beautiful ancient image of interbeing, of interconnectedness. It's like, that's how it is. And it's been known forever. It's been known forever. But now we're able to realize it and also visualize it in very interesting ways and even study it. So in terms of, maybe some of you will recognize people in this picture because there's now a Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health at Harvard, as all of you know. Let's just stop for a moment and realize that was inconceivable 50 years ago. Even if you threw Harvard out and just put in another university. But for Harvard to do it, inconceivable. And it's happened. And it's beautiful. And it has infinite potential. And of course, that infinite potential requires nurturing through science, through investigations of various kinds, through collaborations in networks of individuals who are part of the love affair. And so you get a sense, with the monastics at Harvard University, in the Department of Public Health. It's like this would have just been unimaginable in 1979, and now it's come to pass. And it's really just a harbinger of things to come in extraordinary ways. Vivek Murthy, who until recently was the Surgeon General of the United States, he teaches mindfulness. He's a mindfulness practitioner, and you have the Surgeon General teaching mindfulness. When I started MBSR, one of the inspirations for it was the 1979 Surgeon General's report, Healthy People. And I took that to the hospital and said, hey, we could create a clinic that catches all the people that you don't know what to do with, who are falling through the cracks of the hospital, and challenge them to do something for themselves. And we'll just study it, see what happens. If nothing happens, we'll end it. And people would go back to their doctors after 8 weeks, and this was like, you know, and the doctors would tell us this, and they'd say, the patient said to me that that this MBSR program did more for him or her in 8 weeks than I did for her in 8 years. Okay, because that's the power of engagement. That's the power of collaboration, of participatory medicine. And now NIH is recognizing that participatory, you know, is one of the 4 Ps, I think, of their sort of big deal. And then just to say, because I'm very happy that this study came about, that I don't know how to pronounce Elizabeth's last name. Is it Hoagie? So Elizabeth Hoagie and colleagues at Georgetown University did a study in which they compared MBSR to the top-notch medication for anxiety disorders. 8 weeks of MBSR versus 8 weeks of Lexapro. And they found, in their language, that MBSR was non-inferior to the premier anti-anxiety. They can't say equal to, they have to say non-inferior, which I think is hysterical. But the fact is that there are so many studies, modern studies in the literature, that are showing all sorts of effects of mindfulness on the brain, on how we hold pain, on addiction, on just every conceivable aspect of humanity. Why? Because awareness is a superpower. Now, thinking is a superpower too in a university. Let's not knock thinking, okay? Thinking is fantastic. But it also has side effects. You know, you have to be careful with thinking. Don't prescribe yourself too much thinking because you won't get any sleep. How many of you have ever had the experience of not being able to get to sleep because your mind just would not shut down and it kept producing just the kinds of things that you do not want it to be producing? And the more you try to shut it down, I mean, and then you can go to drugs and stuff like that, but the more you try to shut it down, the more it persists. So this is like, well, what is the source of the pain? What is the source of the suffering here? You know, so awareness, and I use the word superpower with a bow to Greta Thunberg, who talks about her, what's it called? Autism. Thank you. Her autism as a superpower. And if you've ever watched Greta Thunberg give a talk in front of 3,000 or 5,000 people, it's like, it is a superpower. I mean, she is like right on. I mean, just totally present and completely powerful, everything she says. And it's like just beautiful. So, but we're not taught that we're born with this superpower. We're just not taught that. Everything's about thinking. Now that's beginning to shift in the universities. I witness today and yesterday, and I mean Dartmouth and its commitment to mindfulness, and Harvard's commitment to mindfulness, and you know MIT. There's a study at MIT that came out of MIT looking at kids in the Boston school system in middle school, in a very tough school system in the inner city, and they took the kids with the most difficult behavioral records, and they offered them, and it was randomized, coding, which is a really good thing for middle school should be abolished, but without abolishing it, I mean, it's really, or it should be part of the prison system, but without abolishing it, coding is like a way out of poverty. If you know how to code now, I mean, because, of course, that's going to be put out of business with AI soon enough. So, you know, but this study was done maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So either coding or a mindfulness-based program that was originated on the Cape in in elementary and junior high schools called Calmer Choice. And so they actually compared the two after 8 weeks of training in either coding or MBSR-like intervention. And these kids with behavioral problems, in the MBSR group, the behavioral problems dropped a lot. And then they showed brain changes that were related to that drop. And then they showed that those brain changes endured after the 8 weeks of the. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, that you can take kids with really challenging lives in the inner city, train them in mindfulness, and they can actually navigate schools in a way that's, more in their own long-term self-interest. So how many of you recognize this? Okay, this is called the periodic table of the elements. And I want to point out, because we're talking about this Buddha the Scientist and Buddha the Physician, that here's a story, an origin story, okay? Scientists, physicists, cosmologists, everything came out of nothing in no time. Everything. But it's not true that it's everything. What came out is hydrogen and a little helium. That's what the Big Bang gave rise to. Big Bang means very, very, very hot, unimaginably hot, and in no space. Are there any physicists in the room? Am I still on safe ground here? They expect us to actually believe this shit. It's really amazing. I mean, it's like everything came out of nothing, but only in the form of hydrogen and a little helium. Okay? And then what happens? Time. Lots of time. No mind, just lots of time. This is our inheritance. Lots of time, you get star formation. After the opacity goes away and you get, blackness of space, and you get the star formation, the first stars. And then they go through billions of years and they explode. And it's only when they explode that you get the higher elements, like everybody's after rare earth elements now. Nobody knows what rare earth elements are, but everybody wants them for the phones and other digital devices. So these are the rare earth elements. But all of these elements come out of stars or exploding stars. And what do you think you're made of? Yeah, everybody says stardust, but here it is in particular. Okay, so for instance, have you heard of carbon? Where is carbon here? Okay, have you heard of carbon? Organic chemistry. Have you heard of oxygen? Have you heard of nitrogen? This is the making of us. And it all come out of these processes that have to do with stellar evolution. And of course, planets, solar systems are also come out of stellar evolution, because a lot of the debris actually doesn't go back and form another star because it doesn't have enough mass. But some of it, accumulates and becomes planets or moons. And we live on one of those, as it's called, tiny blue dot. And I think this is really important to remember. The preciousness in all of space. And it's like unimaginably vast at this point. It came out of nothing, and it was like kind of contained for a while. But now it's like unimaginably vast and expanding, and also recently discovered, more Nobel Prizes, it's expanding at an accelerating rate. So there's some kind of anti-gravity that's pushing stuff. So the Buddha would love this. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's like mind-blowing. And there's a lot of cosmology in the Buddhist tradition, and it's more far out than this. but it's saying that we belong. Our bodies constitute, and then you get it evolving to the point where you get relative kinds of complexity. I'll show you one right now. Okay? Look at this. Evolution comes up with this. Okay? What's it for? You can't talk that way because it's teleological, but the universe figured out a way on this tiny blue dot to capture sunlight in an efficient enough way to actually create green stuff, like the rainforests, and food that animals could eat billions of years later when animals evolved. And look what evolution never likes to lose track of anything. So if this was pretty cool for full porphyrin ring that can hold a magnesium atom, and you know where that magnesium atom was forged, right? In stars or exploding stars. So a few, God knows how many billions of years later, somebody besides God knows, but I don't know how many billions of years it was, you get the same fourfold porphyrin ring, because once something's evolved, why not keep using it? And only there's an iron atom at the center, and it can bind oxygen. So this grabs sunlight, this binds oxygen. And without this, this wouldn't exist, because this is what we eat. So it's like, well, let's pause for a minute and just take in that we are miraculous beings. This is one of an infinite number of examples that I could give you. I mean, it's insane. So if you're walking around depressed thinking there's something wrong with me, then there's something wrong with you. Because I'm teasing you, of course, but the fact is that you are a miraculous being, or a Buddha, because they're equivalent. And that most complex organization of matter in the known universe that I'm talking about underneath your cranium, it's awesome. And we may never understand its complexity. And then it gives rise to sentience, awareness. All of a sudden, there's something aware about a dog or a cat or even a salamander, or even who knows how far down it goes. But sentience makes an appearance. Awareness. Okay? And it's embodied, because this whole thing is sentient. Okay? It touch. And we use the language, it touches my heart. And we have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. I mean, extraordinary. Every single one of them is miraculous. I talked about wagging my tongue and moving my lips. Nobody knows how this happens. Even Chomsky didn't know how, couldn't say how this happens. And it's grammatically correct. And this is only like maybe 50,000 years old. It's thought that this quality of mind and language is only like maybe 50,000 years old, maybe 100,000 years old. So the evolution of the human brain and the human experience on planet Earth, we're in our infancy. Okay? And it's only like maybe, the last ice age. All of civilization is only as old as the last ice age, right? Before that, there's hunters and gatherers and very, very few people on Earth. And if you read Yuval Noah Harari's children's books about what we did with the big mammals on planet Earth, clever humans, because we had language, we could talk with them. We could talk with each other and say, hey, if we get on three sides of that mammoth and scare it over the cliff, then we'll have food for the winter. Monkeys can't do that. No other species can do what humans can do, because, as Harari says, we can tell stories. Okay? And part of the problem with dukkha is that we create a lot of dukkha by developing those stories, because as I was suggesting earlier, our favorite subject within the story realm is me, myself, and I. My suffering, my anger, my hurt, my aspirations, my ambition. There's nothing wrong with it, except that, it's a root cause of depression. When you don't take personally, and people say to me, well, if you could just give me in one sentence, what would be the take-home message from the meditation practice for a lifetime? Are you ready for this? It would be, don't take personally things that aren't personal. Simple. Wait till the next time something happens to you that you can take personally and see how easy it is. See, so unless you practice, unless you exercise the muscle of mindfulness, it's just not operational. And so the science is really about, what is this capacity that we have? And I don't know how much longer we want to go, since we started a half hour late. And but in Chinese, this is the Chinese calligraphy for the Yen, which is mindfulness in Chinese. Many of you know Chinese, so I'm on really rocky ground here. But it's basically, this means now, or present moment, and this means heart. It's like, it can be written in many different ways, so sometimes it looks like 4 chambers. Heart. Now heart. Okay? So if you hear the word mindfulness and you don't, in your bones, realize, recognize, not with thought, but in some deeper capacity, that it means heartfulness, then you're not understanding it. We make that dualistic distinction in English, but in Asian languages, word for mind, heart, usually the same word. Okay? So heartfulness. And Nyanaponika Thera wrote a book called The Heart of Buddhist Meditation, which I read very early on in my life, and it was a really important element of. So when I used to give medical grand rounds and scientific talks and so forth, I'll show you a few slides of that. Is that okay? Are we okay? We doing okay? Okay, so the simplest way to explain what everybody wants to know, what is mindfulness? It's moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness. And it's cultivated, the access to it is cultivated by paying attention. Okay. And no one can pay attention for you. You have to have the intention to pay attention. And it requires exercising a certain muscle, a certain kind of discipline, because you all got better things to do, right? We're busy. We're under stress. We, grasping at this, that, and the other thing. No one's saying you can't be grasping. Just be aware of grasping. That itself is totally liberating. So you don't have to change anything. Just inhabit this hidden dimension of your own experience that you're born with. So meditation. Now, a lot of people, how many of you are meditation teachers, including the monastics? Just raise your hand if you teach meditation to people who want to know what meditation is. Raise your hands up high so I can feel you're in the room. Okay. So a lot of people, as I was saying earlier, when they learn to meditate, they want an experience. They will, what am I going to do this for? I want a good experience out of it. And then very often it's like, is this all it is? Breathing, breathe in, breathe out. How's that helping me? So sometimes I like to play with people in, the MBSR or in yoga classes or whatever. Okay, if the breath is not that interesting to you, here's a little yogic experiment you can do. You take your forefinger and you put it over the bridge of your nose like this, and you take your thumb and you press it over one nostril. You take your middle finger and you squeeze it over the other nostril. and you see just how long it takes for the breath to become the only thing in the world that you care about. And it's not an abstraction. It's not the breath, it's this breath. This breath. So we're taking things for granted that one day every single person in this room, and it's related in some mysterious way to how many years you've lived on planet Earth already. So some of you are much younger than others. But one day you will take your last breath in and you'll breathe out. Does anybody want to argue with that? So yeah, of course AI will probably fix that, but or some other medical miracle. But until then, like, everybody dies. Okay? The question is there life before death? Oprah once asked me that. John, what do you, just out of the blue, we were having a conversation, and she said, John, she just stuck in, John, what do you think about life after death? And I said to her, Oprah, I'm not at all interested in whether there's life after death. I'm interested in whether there's life before death. Because if you're not here for this moment, that moment of your life is gone. Some over time and zone along on automatic pilot and not pay attention to, like, all the impulses you have to connect in ways that might actually be toxic rather than growth enhancing. And it creates, the technical term is dukkha, suffering, stress. And sometimes now scholars actually translate Buddhist texts in dukkha as suffering. So people are always trying to get somewhere in the meditation practice. And the non-instrumental element of meditation practice, which you might call the wisdom dimension or the non-dual dimension, is there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do, and there's nothing to attain already. And this is straight out of the Prajnaparamita Sutra, okay? And this is the part that, if you're going to be teaching a mindfulness-based intervention, you have to live in this space. You have to understand this not with your head, but with your bones. And there's only one way to do it, and that's to be in the present moment. And to realize that your thoughts are just thoughts. They're wonderful. They can be fabulous, or they can be toxic and imprisoning. But your awareness can hold, no matter how powerful or toxic the thought is, or how wonderful the thought is, awareness is bigger, because awareness can hold any thought and recognize that it's a thought. And in the recognition, you're already free, because you can inhabit mindfulness, awareness itself. So this has really practical implications for people who want to teach mindfulness-based interventions, because if you don't know what this means even, never mind live inside it in your meditation practice moment by moment, and I don't mean just on the meditation cushion, but moment by moment in your life, then you're just living in the instrumental element of it, which is just kind of a scaffolding. You know, I mean, when Leonardo da Vinci painted the Sistine Chapel, okay, he had to get up there. But once the painting was finished, they took the scaffolding down. Okay, so at first, yeah, you got to get people into a room, as I said, with the Kala chakra, and you got to teach them the basics of mindfulness of breathing and everything else. But that's the instrumental part. But without the teacher living and knowing out of direct experience the non-instrumental part, it's just a joke. It's not liberative. It's not Dharma. And so this is a real educational challenge for people who are, you know, want to be part of the profession of mindfulness-based stress reduction or any other kind of mindfulness-based intervention. And I love this quote from Nyanaponika, who, by the way, sounds like a Sri Lankan name because he was a monk in Sri Lanka, but he was actually a German Jewish monk. And one of the first to write a really insightful book in the West on his own experience of meditation practice. He called mindfulness the unfailing master key for knowing the mind, and it's thus the starting point, okay? So we all have to start someplace, and we're going to start in the dualistic world for sure, okay? Because there's me, and then there's my meditation practice. There's, space. The perfect tool for shaping the mind through practice, through actually exercising the muscle, and is thus the focal point. And simultaneously, in every moment, not just after 40 years of meditation in a cave with water dripping on your head, the lofty manifestation of the achieved freedom of the mind, and is thus the culminating point. Okay, it's all, another way to say that, it's all right here, right now. And the Buddha himself, in the Mahasatipatthana Sutra, this is direct, I love this quote, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of liberation, namely the four foundations of mindfulness. Okay. So this is the Buddha the scientist. This is the Buddha the physician of the world. Scientist of the world, physician of the world. Deep insight, deep insight into the incredible levels of complexity and actually recognizing a lawfulness within that complexity. And as far as I know, the Buddha didn't have access to AI, okay? And I want to emphasize that because we're walking into a future where the analog world is going to get really devalued very quickly. And I think we need to resist that more than even what's going on in the United States at the moment. Because once we lose the 13.8 billion years of what I was pointing to with the periodic table and the chlorophyll and the hemoglobin and us and sentience and our ability to actually be compassion and to live in a sort of non-self-orientation that is basically a recognition of the interconnectedness or interbeing in Thai's language. We don't know what will happen, but it's very likely that auto-destruct will be some major element of it. And life, the cockroaches won't care, I'll tell you this. The cockroaches will not care if we have some kind of gigantic nuclear exchange because someone screwed up or just thought that, the others won't respond fast enough. I mean, you see it playing out in Ukraine and in Gaza and everywhere else. I mean, it's like human beings that doesn't recognize the humanity of the other. And then has all sorts of rationalizations for why they're right and the other people are subhuman. I mean, this is kind of like the diagnosis of the world at the moment. The Buddha nailed it 2,600 years ago. Dukkha, suffering, greed, hatred, and delusion. 3 toxins, poisons. And we see it in everybody else. The practice is seeing it in yourself and seeing no separation between self and other. And then we the people means something else. It's not just some slogan or, on a parchment. It's kind of, we have a responsibility to planet Earth, to this small blue dot, that we are actually toxicifying and warming through our own industry, how industrious we are. Since the Industrial Revolution, it's only 300 years ago. It's like, it's nothing, it's just a few generations. We've managed to actually give the planet a fever. We need to wake up to that. There are people, talking about the science of mindfulness, there are people like Christine Wormsler and a whole group at the University of Lund in Sweden who are studying and doing all sorts of interesting studies with mindfulness and sustainability. How do you actually draw back on that and institute some kind of rational sustainability to keep our grandchildren and their grandchildren from living in an environment that, if we don't have sort of make the whole thing a nuclear desert, even so, we will be creating conditions that are, not tolerable for human life. So the Buddha nailed it, that's all I want to say. Four noble truths. First is the diagnosis, right? Dukkha, suffering. Second is the etiology. What is the source of the dukkha? Clinging, attachment, self-identification. What's the prognosis? Fantastic. The prognosis is fantastic. It's a really good prognosis. And then the treatment plan. Okay? What's the treatment plan? The Eightfold Noble Path. Okay? Which, as Thich, points out in many of his books, mindfulness is one of, the Eightfold Noble Path. But mindfulness as a path factor, in some sense, includes all the other. So it's a kind of gateway or doorway into embodied wakefulness. Not in some fantasized future, but right now, because if you're already the Buddha, all you need is to recognize it. Not get there, because there's no there to get to, okay? You mean I have to just sit with the pain in my arm, or my mind that just won't shut down and is playing some Looney Tune inside, or whatever? And the answer is, yeah. But you see, as soon as you actually learn to inhabit that hidden dimension that we call awareness, then you're already free. And you won't take personally all the stuff that's going on, that when you're in the scanner, you have the story of me going on in the medial frontal cortex, the default mode network. So this is where the science and the medicine and the Dharma all are, so to speak. And there's a vast literature, which I'm not really capable of reviewing for you, which is why I'm giving this talk, because I haven't read it all. I mean, it's too much. I mean, it's overwhelming. But there are many people in this room who are doing that work at a really beautiful, cutting-edge level. And hopefully tomorrow, we're going to hear a lot of that in a way that will be really illuminating. So I'll close with whatever is left on my PowerPoint presentation. I have no idea how long it is, so you'll just be in the present moment, don't worry. So when I was giving medical grand rounds, which I did hundreds of medical centers around the country in the old days, I would always put this slide in with my talk. And I would say the following, something like, people recognize this as a kind of religious symbol, okay? And apocryphally, people would come up to the Buddha. This is the Kamakura Buddha in Japan. And they'd say, because he was, how many of you have ever been around the Dalai Lama? Have you been anywhere in close proximity? I mean, I've seen people in a stadium where they couldn't even see the Dalai Lama start crying just because they were that close, in a stadium. So when somebody is, and Thich Nhat Hanh had that, effect on people constantly. Why? Because you're present. There's something about that makes you want to weep. That somebody is so present, because present equals not self-absorbed, not self-centered. And that means his heart as wide as the world. And our hearts are too. And there's all sorts of scientific evidence for that too. And all sorts of other biological aspects of our being. And so when we recognize each other in this kind of a way, it's profound. So people would go up to the Buddha and they'd say, "Are you a god?" And I wasn't there, so I can't testify to what was actually said, but the way I learned it was he would say, "No, I'm awake." And I would say this to all the doctors and scientists in the amphitheaters, hundreds of medical schools, to try to plant the seed of wakefulness, of embodied wakefulness, that you're already okay. There's nothing missing. Whether you're 25 or 85. This is it, this moment, this breath, this sitting here, if we're sitting here or standing here, this interbeing, And the alternative is, and you can be mindful of this too, be mindful of how mindless you are. Anybody ever notice how the whole day has gone by and like, oh yeah, I'm a big meditator, but whoops. Humiliating, or you get into an argument with people that you really love and you want to kill them. And then you realize, oh my God, violence isn't, just out there. And then you take it personally and build a whole story about how bad you are. That just compounds it because that's not true. So if you are zoning along on autopilot and you sum over the course of your life, the implication is that you may never be where you actually are. Now, William James intuited this back in the 1800s, sitting in his office at Harvard. The father of American psychology, he's spoken of. And how many of you know this quote? If you don't, I'm going to read it to you. The faculty, it's very famous. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compo sui, which means in his own right mind, if he have it not. And here the pronouns are like several hundred years old, so I'm going to just read it the way he wrote it. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. This is from Harvard University. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical instructions for bringing it about. Now, Harvard University has a center for Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in the School of Public Health. And public health is what we most need now because that's the whole world. It's not like individual, treatments to get people back on the conveyor belt. This is like taking on the full catastrophe of the human condition on a population level. And the only way to do it is to wake up. I don't see like 10 alternatives that humanity has. Linnaeus, who named the species Homo sapiens sapiens, it's from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know. So if, for instance, I hold up a banana and I say like, what is this? Do you know what this is? I could read the Encyclopedia of Bananas about esters and the aroma of esters and that it actually has a longitudinal threefold symmetry. How many of you know that actually? That you can stick your finger from the point of a banana and then it will split into 3 equal parts. Threefold longitudinal symmetry of a banana. But you can read like the total Encyclopedia of Bananas. But if you really want to know what a banana is, you take it and you take a bite. Okay? Then you know. And it's not thinking anymore, it's tasting. And that's why all of Buddhism talks about one taste. So all you need is one taste. And here you are. Now, and to just say before I come to this, we're almost over. We're almost finished. In the Tibetan tradition, they have various practices that go by, various names like Dzogchen or Mahamudra. And one of the interesting ways that they language things is they talk about non-meditation. And I think there's really an interesting kind of door into practice. Like that the real meditation is non-meditation, but they have a few adjectives to actually shape what they mean by non-meditation. Undistracted. That's a challenge because the mind is all over the place, lost in thought constantly. And then unfabricated. Okay, not making anything. Undistracted, unfabricated, non-meditation. No place to go, nothing to do, nothing to attain. You're already fully who you are. And you have this multiple superpowers. Thinking, there's nothing wrong with thinking. But left to its own devices, problematic. If you have awareness, which I hate to use this word, but I don't know another one, trumps thinking, awareness can actually modulate that, and dukkha, pain, suffering, and the root causes of suffering that are related to grasping, to clinging, to self-identification, to making me the center of the universe instead of understanding that actually humanity is one seamless whole, and that our bodies are the periodic table. We are part of this planet. It's not like there's life on the planet. The planet, and now very serious scientists are talking this way. Originally it was Lovelock and Miraculous, but now everybody's actually recognized the planet is alive. It has all sorts of interesting things going on in the ocean with the plankton and the phytoplankton and unimaginable species that are actually exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide, and that as we pollute and as we destroy the oceans as well as the rainforests, which are the lungs of planet Earth, so to speak, but the oceans are too, then so the whole planet is alive. And so it begs the question of like, who are we? And is it possible for us to wake up to the name that Linnaeus gave us, the species Homo sapiens sapiens, which means the species that is aware, not cognition, the species not thinking, the species that is aware and is aware that it is aware. In other words, awareness and meta-awareness. And you'll hear neuroscientists talk themselves blue about cognition and metacognition. That is not what it is. There's a big difference between cognition and awareness. And ask any neuroscientist, what is awareness? And you'll get I mean, there's something beautiful about it. There's something insanely poetic about it. So let me end with this. This has implications for what we call the self. How many of you have seen this figure, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but I think it's a Kanitsa triangle or something like that. How many of you have seen this? How many of you see a triangle? Raise your hands up high if you see a triangle. Raise them up high, okay, because there's no triangle in that. There's no triangle there. But the eye doesn't have a problem and the brain doesn't have a problem. It just makes a triangle. This is my poor attempt. It should be dynamical, but it's very hard to find one, of what's called in chaos theory a strange attractor. It's a dynamical pattern that's always the same, but never exactly the same. It's always changing, but it's self-similar. That may be a better description of what it means to be human or to be a person than the word self. The word self is empty in the classical way that we use the word empty of any intrinsic nature. But it's not like it's an illusion. It's very real, but it's just not what we think it is. And therefore, when we get caught in the I, me, and mining, we're actually practicing ignorance, ignoring what we already know. From the periodic table, from the Big Bang, let's start with the Big Bang, the periodic table, everything that humanity has managed to grok about itself over the course of 13.8 billion years. We need to actually wake up to the name Linnaeus gave us as a species and to ask ourselves, like a Zen koan, what is called for now? And that's what taking your seat, the way I put it, apologies if this is offensive, get your ass on the cushion tomorrow morning, every morning, and then not thinking, oh, I did my virtuous meditation practice. Life is the meditation practice. The cushion is just the kind of elementary. Life is the meditation practice. Every single moment is the meditation practice. That's why I've stopped using bells in my teaching, because I used to have bells. I carried bells, and not the kind of wonderful bells that you have, but like more like tingsha bells, Tibetan bells. And I'd ring the bells, and I did that for decades, and then I realized, wait a minute, that's giving people the impression that there's a beginning to the meditation. No, now you hear this beautiful sound. Now let's meditate like good little boys and girls. And then when it's over, bong, it's like over. But I stopped doing that because I realized at a certain point, it's always now. There's no beginning to the meditation practice. There's no end to the meditation practice. This is it. And so when we can embody this, and that understanding of this is it, then life itself is the meditation practice. And we inter-are in ways that we're all each other's teachers. We're all each other's teachers. And it really is a love affair. It really is a love affair with sanity, with wakefulness, with interbeing. Oh, well. I'll let this one go. It's one of my favorite neuroscience experiments from the past, but I'll let it go because it's just confirming a lot of what I just said to you. And I want to end with a poem, if that's all right. So I'll end with two, because I spoke about the personal pronouns. So this is my favorite personal pronoun poem. It's by Emily Dickinson. And Emily Dickinson, just like nobody like her, nobody remotely like her, what she could do with the English language. So you have to listen very, very carefully. Me, from myself, to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace, except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be, except by abdication, me of me? You feel that? That's really self-harming. Not waking up to the beauty and getting caught in the separation is a serious source of dukkha. I'll repeat it. Me from myself to banish had I art. Impregnable my fortress unto all heart. We all want to protect ourselves from wounding, especially once you've been wounded in love or whatever. I'm never going to get that vulnerable again because it's just too painful. Don't do that to yourself. Me from myself to banish had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace, except by subjugating consciousness? And, because it's not over, since we're mutual monarch, me and myself, how this be, except by abdication, me of me? You feel the dukkha in that? So here's the antidote to that dukkha by Derek Walcott, an Afro-Caribbean poet, won the Nobel Prize, died maybe 10, 15 years ago. And it's called Love After Love. How many of you know it? Okay, only a few people. Okay. So it starts with the words, "the time will come." But I want to just sort of editorialize on it and say, if you're lucky, the time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. And each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, Give back your heart to yourself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. Thank you, folks.